David, we were talking about practicing, and I would like you to continue on that vein and later on perhaps say a few words about the silent practicing, which has benefited you.
Yeah, well, it's a question of, rather a case of necessity being the mother of invention. I was in Buenos Aires on one of my tours, and as usual, the main problem is to find a piano to practice on. A friend of mine told me that I could, in the family home, which happened to be an apartment, right over an old grouchy lady who resented the practicing terribly and threatened to call the police even during the day. Now, I had my rights and all that, but one doesn't want to get into hassles with neighbors when one is on a concert tour, just because you happen to have your rights to practice that during the day. So I tried to practice as quietly as possible, and then realized that if I depressed the keys very, very slowly, there would be no sound at all. It would also require a terrific amount of control in order not to, first of all, in order to remember what you're doing, because the motions are so slow, so all the motoric, all the tactile memory is lost. Mm-hmm. And I found that a marvelous way of really checking on your memory, first of all. Secondly, the fact of the pressure strengthens the fingers. I imagine there is something similar in the development of muscles just by pressure. You know, there is I don't
Your
remember now.
Your hands are very strong.
Yeah, but I'm sure all pianists' hands are strong.
But not like yours.
Well,
I think
maybe.
yours really...
Maybe. The point is that this kind of pressure strengthens them to such an extent that anything that you do then in fast motion seems awfully easy. It is like practicing, as I've seen baseball players practicing with two bats in order to feel that one bat is extremely light once you throw the other one away. And it's the same thing, having to exert that much pressure to depress the key very slowly and to get it down as far as possible makes playing with the additional motoric speed seem to be extremely easy. Mm-hmm. And I think that, of course, is one of the things we always strive for, to feel that we have a margin of security and strength on the stage, because obviously under pressure, in conditions of a concert performance, you want to feel that despite the reduction in optimum which occurs on the stage, you still have enough margin to be able to play your best. And that is why any kind of an extra strength, extra ability is always welcome. For instance, it is always good to be able to play a piece, a fast piece, faster than you would actually play it, so that when you play it at the speed, the desired speed, it would appear almost slow. That is slower than maximum, and maximum being the limit of your ability. And the same thing has occurred to me also in the area that is the most difficult area of piano playing. And I think that in that, although if you'll get three pianists together, I'm sure you'll find four opinions about anything. I think that this is one of the very few things that most pianists, if not all, will agree on. And that is that the most difficult thing to get on the piano is legato. Mainly because it is, after all, not a string or wind instrument, but an instrument in which you have to produce legato on a percussive mechanism. And in order to get that, I have done the second thing that I'm not saying I've innovated it by any means, but I've done a lot of, and that is mute on my piano. One of the pianos that I have. I have the two concert grands. One of them I mute in order to produce almost no legato by striking the note down. That is, the decay rate is the fastest available, fastest possible. There's almost nothing happening after you strike the note down. That is no after sound, which means that you are really getting the minimal amount of legato. Now, you would ask, how is that conducive to getting a good legato on the piano? Well, it is a very strange thing. If you play on a very good ringing long-lasting piano, long-lasting I mean by the tone is long-lasting, you tend to allow the legato to take care of itself. You don't really strive for it. Your own legato, that is the connection, the overlapping between the notes, becomes sloppy, because after all the piano sound reverberates. It rings through the room. It is beautiful. Why bother? It's doing it all by itself. On a piano that sounds very, very short, that is, each note sounds extremely short, you have to strive to do a legato, and you constantly struggle towards doing that legato. And that by doing that struggle, that is by overlapping more, by connecting more closely, you are actually training yourself to do the ultimate legato, the maximum legato that you are able to do. And then when you get to a concert stage, which happens to be one of those damn dry places where the decay rate is a second or a second and a half, where everything seems to be cut off the minute it gets to the apron of the stage, then you have some sort of a margin of ability that enables you to get legato even on an instrument like that, in a hall like that.
Wonderful.
And that is what is so important in practicing with a handicap. This is what I meant before by saying two bats instead of one bat, so that you feel that you are doing things that are more difficult than normal in order to be able to do them when they're normal with the greatest of ease. And that is what my philosophy of practicing really amounts to, that one should try to practice under the most averse possible conditions, so that when you have conditions on the stage that are, of course, much better, you will not feel that you are doing your maximum, but that you have that margin of ability that had come from the practicing the regime that you have made for yourself.
It's a most unusual stance on practicing, because most people say, oh, I couldn't do that. I have to hear what I'm doing, and I also have to enjoy it. And you're saying, oh, no, not enjoy it, that there's a struggle involved here.
Yes. Well, I would like to hear the results, but that takes exactly, I shouldn't say that, but approximately 5 to 10% of the time. I do have another concert grand on which I play once I feel I'm ready. But in order to get these technical things out of the way, I think one should practice them on the most difficult and handicapped situation, rather than on the under optimum conditions. The ability to enjoy what you're doing. It doesn't come right away anyway. You have to practice first. You have to learn the notes, first of all. You have to decide what you want to do with the notes. You have to learn.
Well, but there's a lot of wallowing. People can waste hours and hours wallowing. So you go right to work, and in a very austere way.
As austere as possible. So that when I really have everything ready, I can sit at the right piano, at the good piano, and hear how it comes out. And then I may be either surprised, pleasantly or unpleasantly, by certain things, or not surprised. If I am unpleasantly surprised by the results, I have to go back to the workshop, which is what the other piano is, and try to develop it again to the extent that I can feel satisfied on the good piano. And I feel that has helped me a great deal. Since I discovered that, it has helped me a great deal. In the sense of security. But the security is not only notes or memory or anything like that. It's security of knowing exactly what I am doing. That is, a security of legato is a very important security, because if I feel that I can sing without any trouble on any instrument that you give me, it is one of the most important achievements in piano playing.
So, yes, and so so you're trying to make the piano, of course, not percussive. There's no pedal then in your practicing.
Exactly. And that is another point.
So you don't fake. You don't say. Now, I know myself that I get away with this, and I've seen lots of pianists not play true legato, knowing that the piano, if it's a good piano, will take care of a lot of blending. You let none of this happen.
Of course,
you are
everything
really
is tied.
Everything is tied.
Yeah, because ultimately the pedal should not really help in legato. That's really the last resort. A pedal should be for the coloristic effect, not for the help that it can lend you in legato. When there's no choice, that is, if you have a legato that skips over, or if your hand is too small and you have to have the help of the pedal, that's something else. But even then, one has to have as long a stay on the first note before one gets to the second note is at all possible. And that you can learn only by not using the pedal while you're practicing, and actually doing what I'm doing, which is reducing even the natural length of a note on the piano to its very, very minimum.
How many hours do you do this,
Now,
austere feat?
Well, I do that, let's say, about at least 3/4 of my practicing. That is, 75% of my practicing is done on that machine, which I hesitate to call a piano, and then 1/4 of it is done on the good piano. You know how many people will tell you that they can't practice because the piano is not good enough to practice on, and that's really nonsense. One can
If you
practice
just
on any
depress
keyboard.
all the way down, and this
All
is
the way
not
down.
surface
No,
of the
it's on
keys
contrary.
either. It's all the way
on the
down.
contrary, all the way down, and you can do it on any lousy keyboard. And of course, on tour, this is one of the banes of one's existence.
This is important.
To be able to practice on any blasted keyboard that is
You're
available.
always practicing slowly then.
Yes. Yes, that goes without saying, and I think that is assured by most theoreticians and pianists that it is better to practice slowly than not. I mean, one can run.
So you're gaining so much more into your nervous system, into the tactile.
Yes, well, into the tactile, into the intellectual, the cerebral. Because if you
do you
play that
hear
slow,
the music?
Yes, you have to, of course. And not only do you hear the music, you have to follow it at a speed that is really snail's pace. And if you follow at that speed, you imprint it in your mind much more than you would imprint it if you just run through it. You know how automatic music making can be after a while, and you can play music without actually listening to it. People can read books while playing music. People can talk while playing music, and that is very. I'm not saying that I can't do it. I can do it too. But the point is that is not exactly the right kind of practicing. That doesn't get the music imprinted in your mind as well as in your fingers the way it would be if you had done it very carefully and slowly.
David, you must admit that what you do takes a form of willpower that few pianists can endure, sitting there, let's say, 4 hours a day without hearing the music.
Yeah, well, as I said,
physically.
Some of it is heard. Some of it for the practicing of legato is heard on a muted piano, and some of it is not heard at all. So, yes, it takes a tremendous amount of willpower and perseverance and persistence, but
the benefits are so fantastic.
I think so, and I need it. Maybe others can do it without it. I'm not saying that it should be prescribed for every pianist. I'm just saying that I need it.
Did you ever play on the Virgil clavier? Do you know that instrument?
No.
A.K. Virgil was a piano builder in the late 19th century, American, who built a silent piano, not a keyboard, an actual piano, and you would. And I had one myself, and it was fascinating. But I must tell you that I could not do this daily, this silent practicing. And it went up to a 10 or 12 ounce heaviness.
Oh, I see, yes.
And you could adjust it. And, of course, It was excellent with legato because you would hear certain clicks. If it wasn't legato, there would be a certain click that would say, you're not really...
Well, you're separating.
Yes.
That's it. Yes, because if you're not separating, they should click together. That's
it would be an instrument you would be fascinated in.
Yeah.
You can still find them occasionally.
Yes.
Okay, that is a fascinating topic, and a lot of people have. You didn't come to this by any means through a teacher. You discovered it yourself.
No, as I told you, it was really the necessity that bred this kind of invention.
Madame Lévy never heard of such a thing.
No, I don't know of any teacher that I'm aware of. I mean, it's very possible that other people do it, but I'm not aware of any. I know that people use silent pianos, but usually it's in order not to wake up the neighbors, or in order to use something on a trip. In the old days,
that's
when
a dumb
you traveled,
piano.
A dumb piano. Yeah, when you traveled by train or by ship, you have a lot, many days in between, and you could carry much more luggage than you can on today's jets. You would carry this kind of a silent keyboard, but that's not what I'm talking about.
Yeah. David, you, I think you once told me you played for Arthur Rubinstein?
Yes.
You met him?
As a matter of fact, it was very early. I shouldn't even say in my career. I was still a student in those days, and it was more in the nature of asking his opinion and his endorsement, so to speak. It was, the sort of thing that one did as a student, go to one of the big stars of the time and ask for approval. Really, that's what it amounted to, because it was no question of my taking lessons from him simply because he was living in Los Angeles at the time, and I just happened to be visiting there. And of course, what I was struck by was the graciousness of the man, which I'm sure you've heard about and you know from your own experience very well. was, of course, the most famous, or one of the two most famous pianists in the world, if you will. At the time, I think Horowitz wasn't playing, so he certainly was the one. And he gave me as much time as I wanted to stay there. He discussed the works that I played in great detail, was complimentary but by no means uncritical. He was complimentary where he felt, obviously, that compliments were in order, but he was critical of what he felt was not. On the other hand, the critique was in no way browbeating or a superior talking to an inferior, that sort of thing, and actually done in a very poetic way rather than technical, which surprised me in a sense. I imagine I shouldn't have been surprised. He would say, instead of saying something about, I still remember the end of the exposition in the Waldstein first movement, instead of saying play this a little more tranquillo, or separate the quarter note from the eighth notes a little more, or make the quarter note a little longer, which is more the kind of advice that I would give students, because I like to talk very, very down to earth. That is something that can be immediately understood. He would say, no, make it a little more like saying goodbye. This is your farewell. Don't sound as if you are still going back to that exposition again, or even to the development. It's as if you're really ending, and only then, practically like an afterthought, you're beginning again. I mean, it was a very successful formulation, but in very poetic terms, and not
like the way he played it as a narrative, as a story.
No, exactly, and that was so typical of the man. And in the same way, to me, it was very meaningful, and I think that I managed to get the improvement that he was striving for by listening to what he said. I am always reluctant to do this with my students, simply because I am afraid that they would misunderstand. One person's goodbye is the other person's go to sleep. And that's a very dangerous, to me, a very dangerous way of explaining what to do with the music. Mm-hmm. And I must say that it was also very helpful in the sense that he called people and told them about me and tried to really. He knew me from nothing. He didn't know who I was. The introduction was made by some obscure third person who happened to know both of us. That sort of thing. And he was, and I heard from other people that he said nice things about me to them and that sort of thing. Which, of course, it was certainly not his duty or obligation. He was just a nice enough person to do it. One usually, it's not too many people who do this sort of thing, as I'm sure I don't have to tell you. Even when they are very well established and not worried about competition or about anything like that. It just going out of the largeness, going out of one's way. It's not as if somebody came up to him and said, "Hey, what do you think of David Bar-Illan?" And then he said, "Oh, you're a very good pianist." It's not that. It was actually his going out of his way to call people, to say something to them. So I was always very grateful and always felt that I owed him that debt. And perhaps my admiration of his playing was even colored by this, because it was I always felt a very warm spot for him.
Now, in the same year, the death of a pianist so much different, Glenn Gould, who was a friend of yours, I believe.
Yes, we were close friends for a long time, and I mean that we actually saw each other, because Glenn Gould could carry on a friendship on the telephone for years, and much of our contact was on the telephone. I was once particularly amused when he called up and he said, "David, listen to this." And before I managed to tell him that we were just sitting down to dinner, he put the Emperor, his tape of the Emperor recording that he had just made with Stokowski on, and he got off the phone. So I didn't even have a chance to say, "I'm sorry, Glenn, I can't listen to this now." And of course, I had to stay on the phone and listen to all 45 minutes of it before he got back on and say, "What do you think?" And he would particularly like reading articles that he wrote to me. And I must say that his ability to play counterpoint was matched only by his ability to write counterpoint. And I don't mean musical counterpoint, but semantic counterpoint. His articles were always the most involved and the most virtuosically written, clause within phrase within clause within participle. That was really quite extraordinary, and it always came out right. You know what I mean? It was never constructed in any in any way but a perfect one, and made a terrific amount of sense and a tremendous joy to read, but to read with that attitude that you have to know that there are different levels of reading.
What's the story of the cough on the phone?
Well, that is when I coughed and sneezed and sounded hoarse, and he said, "What's the matter?" And I said, "I have a cold," and he hung up. as you know.
Fabulous. Did he show any interest in your playing?
Oh yes, I played on his. I even played on his piano, which I believe was a privilege, because he, as you know, guarded the piano with his life. He talked about the piano and treated the piano as if it were a human being. He would talk about its temperament, its ability to return from being untuned to being tuned all by itself. Seriously. Yeah. And that it actually improved with age without being messed with. I mean, just improved by itself. It's a rather unusual attitude. And then once he called me with I really thought he lost a family member. He was in mourning because the piano was dropped by the movers. And I tell you, really, the way he sounded, it was like someone died. Yeah. And when the drop did not seem to, at least for a while, really do any harm, although I believe that later he felt that the piano was damaged by it, he was ecstatic when he felt that the harm that he had expected was not done. So it was really extraordinary. And then being able to play, although once I remember playing a rather more virtuosic piece on his piano, and as I raised my hand, he thought that I was coming down with a great slam on the piano. It wasn't my intention at all, but I sometimes raise my hand from the keyboard. The motion is really upwards rather than downwards. He was afraid that I would come down with the same dispatch, with the same kind of speed, and he said, "Oh, don't, wait." He was afraid that I would hurt his piano.
Oh, God. Oh, it's fantastic.
And I'll never forget that I played a Rondo Capriccioso by Mendelssohn on the piano, and he said, "I think I remember that piece. I must have played it when I was 10 or 11, and I'm sure that, first of all, he didn't know I was going to play it. So there's no way that he could have prepared for this. He sat down and played it in his own inimitable manner, which I must say made it sound a little Bachian, but it was unbelievable.
Could work that way, that piece, yes.
From beginning to end. Oh, yes, you heard more inner voices and counterpoint than you could ever imagine. But there it was, all there. And it was extraordinary because obviously he hadn't thought or played the piece for years, but the fact that I had just played it for him made him feel that he should do something. And he also came to my concerts, which is for me one of the greatest compliments, because you know how he hated. He by the way, he didn't sit in the crowd because he hated to sit with people. He was absolutely averse to it. He couldn't, exactly. He was phobic.
He hated the concert experience, so how could he be?
Exactly. Not only did he hate
crowd,
sitting on the stage where he could sit alone, he actually hated to sit in the crowd. And he was also, as you know, celebrity shy. He didn't want people to recognize him, so he would find a place where nobody could see him, and he would actually look for it before the concert and hide himself there. And write all sorts of cracks about what I did on my music, which were, of course, very amusing.
One of the most brilliant and affable people.
Yes, I enjoyed him particularly because, very honestly, it's very difficult to get away from talking shop when you talk to musicians. But Glenn was one person with whom you could discuss anything you wanted, from politics to Greek philosophy to very mundane things, small talk that had absolutely nothing to do with music.
He was reading constantly, wasn't he?
Reading and writing constantly. He loved to write articles. And
did he have a political view that was interesting to you ever?
No, I must say that his political view was too general for me to be really interested in it. But he could discuss politics with anyone, and he always obviously knew what he was talking about. But it's this intellectual ability, even when discussing music, not to make it sound like shop, but really a discussion from above rather than from inside, that made it so fascinating to talk to him. And it was to know him was really an experience. And of course, the unexpectedness of his appearances was another thing. I think he liked to think of himself as the musical Howard Hughes at the time that Howard Hughes was still alive and still known as this fascinating, mysterious recluse. And that's what he liked to think of it. And he would appear, as you know, Howard Hughes did, out of nowhere. He would suddenly call me and he said, David, I have to record the Moonlight Sonata this afternoon. Should I play it slow or fast? I mean, it was the most incredible. And, I said, excuse me, Glenn, I'll just toss a coin. And I tossed a coin and said, play it fast. Of course, I didn't toss a coin for real. Now, I only said it in order to be funny, but I really feel that the Moonlight Sonata is always played much too slowly. So I said, please play it fast. Anyway, it was and it would come from nowhere, and then I wouldn't hear from him for 6 months, and know that it is silly to pursue him because he probably wanted his isolation for 6 months, or at least isolation from me for 6 months, and then 6 months later he would get on the phone and we would talk for 2 hours, and it could be, of course, midnight when he started the conversation and 2 o'clock when it ended. So
he had to live on his own terms, didn't he?
Yes, and there was obviously a little bit of reluctance to be in actual direct contact with people. He had many television and radio programs, and I was on a few of them. He would interview me, and it was always on the phone. The interviews were always on the phone, and he insisted so much on electronically improving everything we did. As you know, that of course applied to his records. As you know, he would replay the same thing 100 times, and then choose one section from one performance, or one measure from one performance and one measure from another, and put them together, because he felt that way he could really direct his playing more than by just merely playing it, which adds another dimension. It's as if an actor were cutting what he was doing like a director of the movie, and then putting the movie together. And that's the way he thought of it. But even interviews, he would do that. And that is, I once saw the tape of the interview with me, and I never realized how many little splices one could make in order to improve the rhythm, the distance between words, the speed of the words.
Unbelievable.
It's not a question of cutting out the hems and the haws, It was a question of acquiring a new rhythm to what I said and adjusting it to something else that was going on at the same time. For instance, a picture that he was showing if it was a television thing.
What's brilliant.
Or somebody else talking at the same time, but only in the background. And he would adjust my rhythm to his rhythm or to her rhythm. That was a work of art in itself, a montage that had absolutely nothing to do with what I said per se. The meaning of what I said was important, but its rhythm was so important to him, its intonation, its speed, that he had to adjust it to what was going on.
What an energy system he must have had.
Oh, an incredible mind. And I really feel that his mind was a fugal mind, that he could actually think on 3 or 4 levels at the same time.
I'm sure he could. And, of course, the playing contrapuntally was absolutely unbelievable.
An expression of it. I think it was an expression of it. He could really, he could hear 4 conversations, I'm sure. Something that very few of us can. I find that I can more or less follow 2 conversations. I'm very lucky if I can. But he could really follow 4 conversations at the same time. I mean, if 4 different people spoke completely, in 4 different directions at the same time, he would be able to follow it.
And he loved to do various accents and impersonate.
Oh, that's besides. We had a marvelous sense of humor. As you know, his piece that was originally for television, for Canadian television, which was transcribed and published in, I think, one of the magazines, I think it was Pianoforte or something like that, was one of the most extraordinary bits of his revenge on the critics. As you know, he had a vendetta with the critics throughout his life. And it was his revenge, describing different critics who, in spite of the pseudonyms, extremely recognizable. And making as much fun of them as he could.
He seems to be a real conglomerate of a mixture of such a superb human being with unbelievable kinds of intelligence and know-how, and then on the other hand, a neurotic aspect which kept him in bounds, kept him in a certain check, not only away from the public, of course, which I'm sure he had good reason in his mind to stay away from, but just in his habits of living, which may not have been the best for his health.
Yes, it became pathetic, actually, because he was awfully, as you know, worried about microbes.
Was he self-destructive?
Well, I don't want to be an armchair psychiatrist here, but I do feel that much of this became paranoid to the extent that is far beyond the daily paranoia, that we all have to one extent or another.
Yeah.
It became really, really bad. He was really beginning to be phobic about people and about disease and about all sorts of things. And of course, in that respect, I'm sure it didn't do him any good.
You were saying in our discussion before about showmanship. He really did have it in his own way on a high level.
Very high level, but he had it. I mean, to see him conducting himself and conducting the orchestra and conducting the music and humming and singing all through and all that, it was all part of it. He was very aware of it, and I don't think it was just something he couldn't help. But then let me tell you something that has, from an intellectual point of view, or let's say musical point of view, has stuck in my mind more than anything else that Glenn has said. And that is, if you can't do something differently, don't do it. And I feel that is one of the most important things for performing artists to remember. If you can't really contribute something different, why do it? Especially today, and Glenn was particularly aware of today in the sense of electronic reproduction. And especially nowadays, you can hear 15 performances of the Waldoff, the Appassionato, whatever you play, you can hear 15 terrific, great performances on record. Don't do it if you are just trying to do it the way someone else has done it before. Do something different. Bring something of your own to it.
But what if you can't? And so many people play, and it's a rather homogenized age, and one is often criticized for being different now.
Yes, that's very unfortunate. And ever since then, I've slowly but surely become to realize that I must have the power of my convictions and do exactly what I want to do, and the hell with what I'm told about it not being in the right style or in the right period or in the right this or in the right that, or it's too much rubato, or it's too little of this or too little of too much pedal or whatever. I mean, I just believe that I have to do my own thing, to use an expression that I'm not really particularly crazy about, but
do your way.
Perhaps do it really my way, because otherwise I don't see any reason for me to be there. If I'm just a copy of someone else, then someone else is at least as good, if not better than I am. Then why am I there?
Music study is a field particularly clodded with tradition, a heavy tradition. People are frightened to be original or to play in a different way. And of course, in the long run, a Horowitz, a Rubinstein, they were so Cortot, they had so much of their own, and that's really what an audience wants in the long run.
Of course, I believe it is. Unfortunately, many of the critics don't agree with that, and sometimes you are not able to appear in front of an audience if the critics really don't like you, and so that you don't have the opportunity.
But why should one care about a critic?
No, I'm not saying that one should care. I'm only saying now, on the contrary, I'm saying that one should not care. But I'm saying only that the critics can sometimes prevent you from appearing in front of an audience if they really ruin your career. That's what I mean.
You mean critics can ruin a career?
Well, they can certainly retard it to a great extent, and I think that especially nowadays, it's very difficult to combat a kind of concerted attack if you do something that the critics really don't like. And I feel that's really terrible, because I'm absolutely sure that if a reincarnation of Cortot appeared today, he would be slaughtered before he had a chance to appear in front of an audience. I'm also convinced completely that if he appeared before an audience today, he would be beloved just as he was at the time that he appeared in his day.
Every pianist that speaks of Cortot goes into raves.
Paroxysms of rave. Absolutely. I think that he was the greatest individualist and the greatest, I don't like to say greatest, because it is really one of those superlatives that one shouldn't use in art, but of all the people, he moves me most, okay? Yeah. Of all the people who play the piano, he moves me most.
Does Horowitz excite you most?
Excite me most, and I still feel that, especially in some music, there is just nothing like the Cortot experience. But there you are. He played, as I say, I'm sure that he wouldn't be able to survive a debut today. And on the other hand, if he did survive it and did appear in front of an audience, he would do damn well, because the audiences cannot help but respond to this kind of immediacy, to this kind of getting to the gut of the music, and this kind of individuality, personality, throwing it in one and only way, the Cortot way.
The only way. that he had was the Cortoe, and he lived by it. So this
That's
is
why
you're
I feel
saying.
that
Yeah.
what Gould said is so pertinent. Gould played, I know that I recognize Gould in 2 phrases at the most, I mean, whatever he does, if I dislike it intensely, I nevertheless recognize it.
Yeah.
And I'd rather recognize and dislike than say, oh, it's one of the 5 dozen pianists who are on the stage today, and it's very, very good.
Well, how did the critics get this power that that performers are afraid of them?
No, I don't think performers are really afraid. I'm only talking about it from a point of view of career making and business. I don't think they're really afraid. I frankly find most of my colleagues, I wouldn't call it afraid. It's certainly not to the extent that they would really pay very much attention to what they say. It's just from a point of view of one's career. If some major critics at a turning point in your life, let's say at your debut or your debut with the New York Philharmonic, with a great orchestra, at a point in which it is extremely important for you to get good reviews, you get bad reviews. I must say I've been very lucky in that respect, but some people are not. And if you get bad reviews at a bad, crucial time, it may very well discourage you, or discourage your manager, or discourage the concert auspices that might engage you from engaging you. And that is what I'm talking about. And then you will have no opportunity to prove your mettle in front of an audience.
You've played for various great conductors. Did you ever play a concerto with Stokowski?
No.
No one did,
No.
almost, did they?
No.
You didn't.
I didn't. I played with the American Symphony when he was the musical director, but it was a guest
Who
conductor.
was one of the great conductors you played with? Metropolis?
Well, again, I don't want to single out, because that's always... It's not even a question of my wanting to be diplomatic about it. It's just that I'm sure my memory would betray me, and I'll forget the 2 or 3
Not
that are
important.
most... But I must say that one of the greatest experiences was to play with Metropolis, because Metropolis was, again, one of those absolutely exciting music makers.
Who was also a wonderful pianist.
Great pianist who knew every note that you played, and was able to therefore accompany the way very few could. But it was more than accompaniment always with him, because you really felt that he was making music with you rather than just accompanying. And that was, I felt, not only a great experience for me in general, but also in particular because it was with him that I made my debut with the New York Philharmonic, and I felt that there couldn't have been a more auspicious kind of debut for
What
me,
work?
from a musical point of view, not only from a career point of view. I played the Liszt D flat. with him. I also played with him in Israel. I played the Schumann and the Schumann Allegro Appassionato, they're very seldom played. Introduction Allegro Appassionato is very seldom played, and the Starrer Concerto.
Robert Starr.
Yes, the number 2, not the number 3 that I play now, but the number 2. And he was really my first great conductor, so to speak, and he also is the one who was most instrumental in putting me on the map, so to speak.
You were speaking before about composers, and you just mentioned that you played the Starr number 2 and 3, and you've played some of his solo music. This must be a contemporary composer you believe in.
Yes, I believe that it's better, merely from a practical point of view, if every one of us picks on one composer he likes and believes in and wants to tout, and goes on with it, rather than pay our homage to various composers, various contemporary composers, and not really doing a selling job because of that. You understand what I mean? If I really record Starrer and play Starrer everywhere, it is, I think, easier to bring him to the attention of the audience than if I divide the time that I play contemporary composers with too many others. So I really try to play as much Starrer as possible.
Oh,
that doesn't mean that I play other composers. Of course I do, but there are very few, I must say, that I like to the extent that I would like to play them. And that's one of the limitations.
You have a tremendous concerto repertoire. You're constantly playing with orchestras. How do you keep how many concertos a year in your fingers?
I try not to play more than 10 a year. I feel that's really the...
That's a lot, though, isn't it?
That's an optimal and a maximal number. And it is a lot. It is also a lot, not only because if it were spread out over the season, it wouldn't be a lot. You see, if you have 10 months of a season and you play one concerto a month, it's very little. I mean, you could play that concerto that month. In January I play the Beethoven Fourth, and I can play it 10 times in January. It doesn't bother me at all, of course. However, sometimes it doesn't work that way. And if you play all 10 of them in 2 months, that's really a very, very difficult thing to do. And that's why it can get dangerous. At one point, I think I played the maximum that I ever played in one season was 13 concertos in one season. And of course, I prefer to play fewer. I think it's better to play fewer. It gives you a chance to really grow in the concerto in that season. You know, not only the fact that you've been playing it for 20 years, let's say, but also the fact that during the one season, in a concentrated way, you can play one concerto 10 times. That's very good for it. Because it gives it a certain kind of experience that you can't get by playing it 10 times over the period of 3 years. If you play it 10 times, even in 1 month, it's a very, very helpful thing for a concerto.
You were born in Israel. Is Israel musically good audiences?
Yes, it's a conservative but excellent audience. Conservative in that there are not great supporters of contemporary music. It is also the largest audience per capita in the world for classical music. So, as you know, the Israel Philharmonic repeats every concert 16 times to satisfy all its subscribers. Tel Aviv is a city, if you include everything, you know, all the metropolitan area, I'd say about 800,000 people. And they have 35,000 subscribers in Tel Aviv. Well, that's an absolutely incredible ratio of subscribers to the population. So it's a good audience, and it's a very enthusiastic audience. And as I say, conservative, but very faithful. And the fact is that the Israel Philharmonic, because of that, has developed into being one of the best orchestras in the world, with Meta as a musical director. And
what about teaching in Israel? You were born there?
Yes, but you mean what I was taught?
Was it good teaching there?
Yes, in the 30s, many European artists, teachers, pianists came to the country as a result of the rise of the Nazis, and of course, many of them, just by the way, as they came to this country at that time, you know, many of them came here. Many came to Israel, and I think that created a cadre of teachers in both countries that were of really a very high caliber. I started with one of those. I mean, a teacher who came from Prague when the Nazis came there, and
you want to name him?
Yes, Hans Neumann, who was really quite an extraordinary musician. Neumann.
Still alive?
No.
Okay.
And really quite an extraordinary musician who played a lot of concerts in Europe and who had the kind of cultural background that very few people in the Middle East would have had that time if it hadn't been for Hitler. And as I say, that also, as you know, did a great deal for the musical life in America. The fact that so many great musicians emigrated, not because necessarily they wanted to, but because they had to, brought an injection of musical culture to America that it had never enjoyed before during the 30s. And
have you, as a Israeli, as a Jew, did you ever think how many pianists were burned by Hitler? Future pianists, probably?
Well, of course, it's not only a pianist, though. I can't even limit it to that because when I think of 1 million children, 6 million people, and 1 million of them are children. 1 million children are killed, and you know the kind of talents, genius that came from that part of the world.
And that period of time was producing.
Exactly. Think of the fact that, you know, the old joke when Hirok was asked what is cultural exchange. The cultural exchange is that when the Russians send us Jews from Odessa and we send them Jews from Odessa, because after all the origin of practically every great violinist in this country and in Russia, both, was from one small area of the country, of Russia.
Hundreds of pianists as well from Odessa.
And from, if you extend it to Kiev, you get also the pianists. I mean, all you have to do is go a few miles up, and that's about it. So you can imagine what could have been in Poland, where the whole community of 2 million people was wiped out. Where in Russia 1 million people were wiped out. I mean, 1 million Jews in the areas that are now under Soviet domination, and of course all the others, the French Jews, the German Jews, who contributed not only to music but to every aspect of culture in a way that is probably incomparable. Just see what the post-war years have brought, where the number of Jews among the Nobel Prize winners is, I believe, over a third, completely disproportionate to the number in the population, of course. And you can imagine what was lost in the murder of 6 million of them.
In the sense of the genetic pool is one of the great tragedies of all time.
Yes.
I mean, nothing has ever equaled it.
No, that's correct.
And this is not just in the sense of the 6 million, but what would have spawned from these people living a normal life.
Well, I mean, they're the same people who produced Freud and
Freud,
Einstein,
Marx,
and Einstein, the three most
Schoenberg, every innovative. Why did this happen? Did you ever have a theory of why the flowering of not only the musical, the pianistic, the violinistic ability that flowered in this period from 1850 to 1930, let's say,
among
Jewish pianists?
Yes, of course. It's a very simple explanation, actually. I mean, there are many things that we can't explain. For instance, why 80-90% of the great violinists are Jews. That we can't explain. And nor can we explain why there's so many more among the violinists than among the pianists or other instruments.
But a tremendous amount on pianists.
Even among the pianists, it's at least 50% of the great ones, if not more.
Even in the 19th century.
Is the essential music making. I mean, that is the essence. That is where it comes from.
David, you play the piano. It's serious stuff. You work hard. You travel. You get on planes. You have jet lag. You go through hell. You play in 15,000 feet high. What do you do for relaxation? Do you ever go to a ball game? Is there a hobby you have? Or is there no time for such things?
After a concert, I usually unwind with a movie on television. I mean, as a let's say as lowbrow as all that, because that usually is practically mindless watching.
Sure.
And it does relax me, and because one has to unwind after a concert, it's impossible to do it instantaneously.
Do you have any vices, addictions?
Only to politics. Really, I don't smoke, and I don't drink, and I don't gamble.
Now, what do you mean to politics?
I love to read about politics, to think about politics, to every once in a while even dabble in writing something, mostly Israeli politics and things that have to do with Israel.
You're obviously very concerned with that nation's survival.
Yes, I think all Israelis are, but I feel that I have to do something about it, and I do it usually by writing an article about it, or an angry letter to some editor, and that sort of thing. But I read voraciously about politics. I can't say that about anything else, really. I don't read half as much about music as I do about politics. And
would you have ever gone into politics?
Well, those what if questions are very iffy. I don't know. I feel that I'm good at it, that I would have probably felt comfortable with it, that it would have fascinated me and challenged me, but I don't really know. I mean,
well, if Reagan, as an actor,
and
right, hardly as serious an artist as you are, right, could become the president of this huge country,
well, that's what
and Paderewski was a very, very good pianist and full of the thing we called before stage presence
charisma,
and
yes,
charisma.
Yes, quite.
He became the president of
both prime minister and president. Yes, he was both.
You have charisma.
Well, the only thing is that I don't like to use the Paderewski example, not only because it might be a little pretentious. First of all, he was also the most famous pianist of his time, and also immediately a prime minister and then a president. I mean, he didn't go through any ranks.
You're one of the 100 most famous pianists.
But still, on the other hand, I can't say that he was a very effective prime minister. A president was really just a thing that he got during the war.
It was not an easy time.
No, but he was completely cowed by Pilsudski, so I don't think he was a very good prime minister. But I'm fascinated by it. Let's put it this way. And if you would want me to pinpoint a hobby, I would say politics was my hobby. I at one time was an amateur archaeologist, and I loved to go to digs and to and loved to lecture about biblical archaeology. That was my subject. I actually, when I was in school here, at the Juilliard, in order to make a living, I would give lessons in archaeology, because I couldn't quite see myself making a living giving lessons to little kids playing the piano, because I would have learned very quickly to hate the piano passionately, and I didn't want to do quite that. So I taught archaeology, biblical archaeology instead. And I actually at one time had classes that comprised altogether 100 students.
How amazing. Do you see colors? Rimsky-Korsakov said that for him certain keys were different colors. Do you ever see colors? Is there any other...
Rimsky and Scriabin, wasn't it?
Scriabin also, but Rimsky definitely had that.
Yes. No.
Uh-huh.
Not at all.
You were saying something before about the components of talent, the levels. Talent is a big word. There's components of temperament, and some people go to music early because they have perfect pitch.
Right, and because they remember things extremely well. They play by ear very well. There are all sorts of reasons.
And yet this itself does not mean that they will be sensitive musicians.
None at all. Not at all. I know many people who are, whose memory I envy and remember everything they ever heard and can play anything and everything by ear, and who wouldn't move a fly off the wall. I mean, it doesn't make a difference that they play the piano or anything else. And unless most of the components are present, it's practically impossible to expect a career, because many of these components, at least, if not all, have to be present for anyone to be able to become an important concert pianist.
I'm going to ask you this thing that you brought up, rhythm, and Leo Smit, a composer, pianist, who studied with Vengarova. You studied with Levine before. It was Levine the legend she was supposed to be? It's enough. No.
Well, first of all, my answer is no. And also, that very few legends are the legends that they're supposed to be. Legends grow with time. You know what you said before about tradition and our being unable to get rid of tradition. It reminds me a little bit of what Schnabel said about tradition. Tradition is a collection of bad habits. And legend is a collection of these traditions, actually. That's what it means. A story passes to another and to another and to another. And it grows, as all legends do. All oral history becomes really legend rather than history. Mythology rather than fact. And sometimes, or most of the time, luck has a lot to do with it. And teachers became legends, I think, when they were lucky enough to have one great student whose success usually brought into their class many other talented people who felt that if XY was successful, then there's no reason why I shouldn't be. And perhaps some of the reason is his having studied with that particular teacher. In that
case of Levine, it was Van Cliburn, wasn't it?
Well, it was before Van Cliburn, because he, they taught together, Joseph Levine and she were famous pianists. And Van Cliburn was certainly by far the greatest celebrity that she produced in her studio, but there were quite a few, including Browning and others. Samarov is also another example. She produced Willy Capel, so she became a very, very important and
Did you like his playing, Capel?
Oh, yes.
Tell me of that.
Very much so. I think it's some of the most exciting playing. And
31, he died.
Yes, I remember it because the 2 flights before that we took together. That was, of course, as you remember, in a plane crash. He played in Israel, went to America, and on that flight we were together, and then went to Australia. From there, and when he came back from Australia, he was killed, and it was a terrific loss for me personally as well as musically, because I felt that he was head and shoulders above, mostly for the reason that I cited before, that he could not be typed. It wasn't the same thing, like every other or one of dozen pianists. It wasn't just excellent playing; it was Capel's playing, and it was extremely exciting.
And he had a glamour and that presence, that showmanship, as you were,
and excitement.
Didn't
and
he?
The Rachmaninoff second and the Chopin B minor are incomparable. The Khachaturian concerto, just incredible performances of these pieces.
Some of the mazurkas are wonderful.
Oh yes.
When I saw you recently, you were asking me about the Friedman recording you wanted to, because you thought Friedman played the mazurka so wonderfully. Ignaz Friedman.
Incomparably, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Why did he have that? I mean,
I don't really know, and I don't even understand what he's doing. I've been trying very hard to understand what he does. I try to imitate it, not in public, because in public I wouldn't imitate, but I
just to learn what he's
doing.
Or
to try to even figure it out, and I couldn't. I just couldn't. I find perhaps some ingredients that I can pinpoint, but not others. And for me, that's part of the greatness of the enigma. That's part of the greatness of it. Even a musician who, and I feel that I'm as good an analyzer of performances as anyone, without, I hope, sounding too conceited about it. I just feel that, with all the experience we have, we usually analyze other people's performances very well. I simply cannot figure it out. And this is what part of it is, the mystery, the enigma. What makes it so fascinating? What is it about Cortot, with all the wrong notes and with all the variation in tempi that sometimes you simply can't understand, and with all the crazy things that he does? What is it about his performance that makes your heart beat faster, or makes your gut tie up in knots, and make you feel that this is the only moment of that piece that is valid, the only moment in which that music is made the way it should be made? That is the greatness of those performances.
Smit was asked when he was playing something with the music, why? Someone said, you seem to know it from you. Why did you need the music? And he said, my eyes love to study beautiful things. The longer I look, the more I see, even in public performance. Too often memory merely records an interpretation of the notes, not the music itself. Sometimes ignorance can equate memory with knowledge. Memory is a dangerously overrated component of musicianship, he said. What do you think of that?
I think in principle, he's right. Unfortunately, playing from memory has become a ritual which we dare not break, and unless we are old, venerable people who have proven themselves for 60, 70 years, and at the age of 85 decide to put the music in front of them, we cannot be forgiven for it by the audience, and that's really tragic, because there are many people who can be terrific pianists if you could only allow them to put the music on the piano in front of them. And that is, I think, a great pity. Now, it's become very fashionable among conductors, and fortunately, Scholti put an end to it. Scholti is certainly one of the great conductors, and he just put the music in front of him, and that's it. So since then, many conductors who don't have the kind of memory that a Mehta or a Bernstein
or Toscanini
are not afraid to put the music in front of them and make very good music, as Scholti does, with the music in front of him. The fact that he very seldom looks at it has absolutely nothing to do with it. It means that he feels more secure if he doesn't have to remember everything. That he can make music with that security blanket in front of him. Fine and good. However, the ritual has made it almost impossible for us who are younger than 85 and who don't have this kind of venerable background to play with the music. On the other hand, I must say that personally, even if there were no taboo on playing with the music, I wouldn't, for a very simple reason. I really don't feel as free in making music when the music is in front of me. When I play chamber music, when, of course, the music is in front of me, I don't feel the same way. I somehow don't listen the same way. Maybe it's my fault. Maybe there's something wrong. But when I don't have the music in front of me, I feel that I'm freer to listen. It is as if one sense, the visual sense, interferes with my audio, so that my listening is not as concentrated, as completely exclusive as when I have the music in front of me. So it may very well be my impediment, my weakness, my drawback, but it nevertheless exists, and therefore I feel freer playing without the music. As much as I worry about memory, and as much as I worry about memory slips, I still feel freer about playing without the music. I feel I can make music better.
The standard of pianists are very high in the professional world. They're good.
Yes.
How about conducting? Because you play a lot of concertos, you must, come up to see a lot of people.
I think it's the same thing. The technique and the expertise is there to the extent that it had never existed before, and it'll probably continue to improve because the numbers are staggering of young conductors, very talented, young pianists, extremely talented. What I feel I miss, as much as I miss among pianists, is personality. I mean, difference. The technique is there, the ability to make music adequately and more than adequately, satisfactorily, and very, very well and excellently. But to sweep me off my feet, to make me faint, to make me feel that
Why
I've
is
got
this
to
not
catch
happening?
You're looking at a man who can only ask the question. I'll give you the answer. And oh, well, I could venture guesses. I suppose, that we have this cross-pollination of cultures now because of the fact that the world is a global village. And so there are no schools as such. We all play. There's no such thing as a Russian school anymore, or German school, or an American school, or a French school. We all play the same way because we can hear everybody. In the days before records and radio and fast jet travel, you could live until you were a traveling concert pianist without hearing anybody except people of your school. If you were in France, you could only hear the French school, and if you're in Russia, etc. Nowadays, we hear everything. By the time we're 15, we know how everybody plays. Everybody, from the youngest to the oldest, to the revival of the LPs of Cortot to French,
It's
German,
amazing, isn't it?
right.
This communication,
absolutely versatile and universal. No.
If Cortot had known 50 years later that his records would be scrutinized, he would have blinked, because he went in there one day with his eyes bleary and just played them.
Memory slips
on stage over and over,
and in the studio, and left them on the record. That's the way I played on the 13th of August, 1933.
That's the package for the day. Take it or leave it. And today everyone loves it.
Maybe I'll do it better next year. Yeah. But the hell with it right now.
I didn't have a chance to work on it. I'm too busy doing a lot of things.
Besides, that's the way the ballad is. Anyway, what's the difference? I played it well, so I had a memory slip. So what? And that, of course, is something that doesn't exist today at all. And we are also influenced by this very fact, by the fact of the recordings. And the recordings have sterilized playing, of course, sterilize it to the extent that you can't tolerate a wrong note. I'm very happy to say that Audiophone has its manifesto on every record. We believe that it is better to get a good performance than to get an absolutely clean one.
Sure.
And therefore, if there's some wrong notes, tough. So they stay on the record if the performance was satisfactory to the pianist. And I like that very much. So with that disclaimer, I can play a piece and say, oh, fine. So that measure was not as clean as I would have been able to do it if I'd played it 100 times, or if I played it the next time and then made the performance less.
The little machine,
all these things contribute to a certain uniformity in our performances, and that perhaps is why we are missing the great personalities.
Max Power was a pianist born around 1860, and he recorded early in the century.
Sure.
And
I didn't know that too.
Yeah, and he said something most interesting. He said that when he recorded for the first time, he heard it back, and he was amazed. Why? Because he had heard hundreds of faults, of common faults that he would in his own students say don't do, and this machine just cleaned everything up.
Well, at least it showed him so he could clean it up, and of course in his time he couldn't actually clean it up, because today, as you know, you can clean it up to the ultimate degree.
But the fact that he was horrified already at what he had heard of his own playing,
right, of course,
was the beginning of this.
Of course. That's it. So the scrutiny has become, in the true sense of the word, sterilizing, which means also that you are unproductive. I mean, it's not only sterilized, but sterile.
So are we in a more sterile world?
Yes, I think artistically, definitely.
Well, what about the world itself, which is so full of violence and turbulence now, more than ever in history, no doubt about it?
I'd like to dispute that. I don't think there's more violence than ever in history. I think violence existed always, and since we're talking about sterility in art, I don't think we can translate it to our behavioral modes or to our morality. I don't think that has anything to do with it. And violence always existed. Now we have weapons that do it a little better than before. That's about it. But it's not a difference in principle between the 19th century, the 18th century, the 70s. There wasn't a century without terrific violence all over the world. No, it's not that. If there is some kind of mechanization and sterility, one can find it also in architecture, one can find it in all forms of art. But I don't think it can be translated to other endeavors.
Mm-hmm.